Captain Jake Morrison stood on the bridge of the USS Liberty and watched the stars through the main window. The year was 2387, and humans had spread across many star systems. They built colonies and trade routes throughout their part of the galaxy. Jake had been exploring space for 15 years and thought he had seen everything. He was wrong. The Liberty was on a routine mission to map new systems when Lieutenant Danny Walsh called out from his station. "Captain, we have something strange. On the sensors," he said. Jake walked over to look at the readings. There was a large object drifting in empty space, about 2 million kilometers away. It was not moving and gave off no energy signals. "Take us closer," Jake ordered. The ship moved toward the unknown object. As they got nearer, the crew could see it was a massive vessel unlike anything they had ever seen. The hull was dark metal, with strange symbols carved into its surface. It looked ancient and dead. Dr. Lisa Chen came to the bridge. She was the ship's expert on alien cultures and technology. Her eyes went wide when she saw the vessel. "Captain, I think this might be a Kalari ship," she said with excitement in her voice. The Kalari were an advanced alien race that had disappeared 300 years ago. No one knew what happened to them. Jake gave orders to dock with the alien ship. The airlock connected and a team in spacesuits went aboard. The interior was dark and cold. Emergency lights flickered on as they moved through the corridors. Everything was covered in dust and showed signs of great age. Lisa found the ship's main computer and began working to access its files. After hours of careful work, she managed to break through the security systems. What she found made her blood run cold. The computer contained thousands of records and messages from the final days of the Kalari civilization. The files spoke of something called the Endless Darkness that was moving through their space. It consumed entire star systems and left nothing behind. The Kalari had tried to fight it, but their weapons were useless. Their final message was a warning to any race that might find their ship. Meanwhile, on the frontier colony of New Denver, Governor Paul Rodriguez was dealing with his own problems. The mining stations in the outer system had been sending strange reports. Their sensors were picking up massive objects moving through space between the stars. The objects were so large they bent space around them. Paul tried to contact the mining crews, but their communication signals were getting weaker. One by one, the stations went silent. It was as if something was eating the radio waves themselves. The technicians could not explain what was happening. Commander Sandra Blake was at the Earth Defense Fleet headquarters when the reports started coming in. Similar problems were happening across multiple sectors of human space. Long-range telescopes showed that stars were beginning to disappear from the sky, not exploding or burning out, but simply vanishing as if they had never existed. Sandra pulled up star charts from the past year and compared them to current observations. The pattern was clear and terrifying. Something was moving through space and erasing everything in its path. The missing regions formed a rough line pointing directly toward human territory. Back on the Liberty, Jake received an emergency transmission from Earth Command. All exploration ships were ordered to return to base immediately. The message also contained the data that Lisa had found on the Kalari ship. High Command wanted to study everything they could about this endless darkness. Lisa worked day and night to translate more of the alien files. She discovered that the Kalari were not the first civilization to face this threat. The records mentioned dozens of other races that had been consumed over the centuries. Each one had tried to fight, and each one had failed. The files described how the darkness moved. It did not destroy matter in the normal way. Instead, it seemed to unravel the basic forces that held atoms together. Entire planets would simply stop existing, leaving behind regions of empty space where nothing could survive. Jake ordered his crew to make best speed back to Earth. As the Liberty jumped to faster-than-light travel, he could not shake the feeling that they were being watched. The ancient alien ship had felt wrong somehow, as if the darkness had left some trace of itself behind. The journey home took 3 days. When they arrived at Earth orbit, Jake was shocked by what he saw. The normally busy space lanes were empty, except for military ships. Civilian traffic had been suspended, and defense platforms were being moved into position around every human world. Admiral Kate Sullivan met with Jake and Lisa as soon as they docked. She was a veteran officer with 30 years of service, but Jake had never seen her look so worried. "We need everything you found on that ship," she said. "The darkness has already consumed 3 star systems on our border. We estimate we have 6 months before it reaches Earth." 3 months had passed since the discovery of the Kailari ship, and humanity now faced its darkest hour. The endless darkness had consumed 17 star systems, including several human colonies. Millions of people had simply vanished, without any trace left behind. Their worlds were now empty points in space where matter itself seemed to have been completely erased. Admiral Kate Sullivan stood in the command center of the UES Defiance and watched the tactical displays with growing dread. Her flagship had become a mobile headquarters as human forces retreated from sector after sector. The evacuation efforts were massive, but they could never move fast enough. The darkness was spreading like a plague across the galaxy and leaving behind regions of absolute void. The alien phenomenon defied everything humans knew about physics. It did not just destroy matter and energy, but seemed to consume the very fabric of space and time. Scientists had tried every weapon in the human arsenal, but nothing could even slow its advance. Nuclear missiles, energy beams, and gravity bombs all disappeared into the void without any effect. Dr. Benjamin Carter worked around the clock with an international team of scientists trying to understand their enemy. His laboratory on Earth had become the center of humanity's desperate research efforts. Sleep was a luxury he could not afford when the survival of his species hung in the balance. The research data painted a terrifying picture. The darkness was not just consuming matter randomly, but was actually unraveling the fundamental forces that held reality together. Each star system it devoured made the entity stronger and faster. What had started as a slow creep across space was now accelerating toward human territory like an avalanche. On the agricultural world of Green Valley, farmer Amy Johnson had organized the local population into militia units. Her people had discovered something strange while evacuating the mining facilities. Certain rare earth elements seemed to slow the darkness when it approached. The effect was small, but it created tiny pockets of stability in the advancing void. Amy sent samples of these elements to Dr. Carter's team on Earth. The discovery gave humanity its first glimmer of hope since the crisis began. If they could understand why these materials had an effect, they might find a way to fight back against the seemingly unstoppable force. Young communications officer Danny Walsh had been stationed on a remote observation post near the border of consumed space. His job was to monitor the darkness and report any changes in its behavior. What he found was both fascinating and terrifying. The entity was not moving randomly through space, but following a deliberate pattern. Danny spent weeks analyzing the sensor data and mapping the darkness's movements. There was a rhythm to its advance that suggested intelligence rather than simple cosmic hunger. The entity was not just consuming everything in its path, but was following a carefully planned strategy to maximize its growth. The pattern revealed that the darkness targeted star systems with the highest concentrations of life and energy first. It avoided empty regions of space and seemed drawn to areas where civilizations had flourished. This discovery changed everything about how humans understood their enemy. Commander Sandra Blake was coordinating defense efforts from the outer colonies when she received Danny's report. The implications were staggering. If the darkness was truly intelligent, then it could be reasoned with or perhaps even tricked. But it also meant that their enemy was far more dangerous than anyone had imagined. The evacuation of human space continued as millions of people fled toward Earth and the core worlds. Massive transport ships carried entire populations away from the advancing void. Many colonies had to be abandoned with only hours of warning as the darkness moved faster than anyone expected. Dr. Carter's team made another breakthrough when they analyzed the rare Earth samples from Green Valley. The elements contained traces of quantum structures that seemed to resist the void's reality unraveling effect. The discovery suggested that the darkness operated by disrupting the quantum foundations of matter itself. Working with this new knowledge, human scientists began developing experimental weapons based on quantum resonance theory. The weapons were designed to create stable fields of space-time that might be able to resist the darkness's advance. The first prototypes were rushed into production, even though testing was incomplete. Admiral Sullivan received reports from across human space. As the new weapons were deployed, the results were mixed but encouraging. The quantum resonance devices could not stop the darkness, but they could slow it down in small areas. For the first time since the crisis began, human forces had achieved something other than complete retreat. The 2D success was limited and came at a terrible cost. The quantum weapons required enormous amounts of energy to operate and burned out quickly under the stress. Entire power plants had to be sacrificed to run a single device for just a few hours, but those hours might be enough to evacuate populations that would otherwise be lost. As the darkness continued its relentless advance, something unexpected began to happen throughout human space. Instead of falling into despair, people started to show remarkable courage and determination. Communities that had never worked together before began coordinating their defense efforts. Amy Johnson's militia on Green Valley became a model for resistance groups throughout the outer colonies. Farmers, miners, and factory workers took up arms alongside professional soldiers. They knew they could not stop the darkness, but they refused to run without a fight. The spirit of resistance spread from world to world as humans realized they were facing extinction. Rather than giving up hope, they began to discover strengths they never knew they possessed. Parents fought to protect their children, friends died for each other, and strangers became heroes. Dr. Carter noticed something strange in the sensor, readings from areas where human resistance was strongest. The darkness seemed to slow down when it encountered concentrated displays of courage and determination. The effect was small but measurable, as if human emotions somehow interfered with the entity's ability to consume reality. As the endless darkness continued its advance and consumed nearly a third of human space, something remarkable began to happen across the remaining colonies. Rather than falling into despair and panic, humanity's fighting spirit awakened with a power that surprised even their own leaders. The threat of extinction had not broken them, but had instead forged them into something stronger than they had ever been before. Engineer Maria Santos worked in a hidden base beneath the surface of the mining world Titan 7. She led a team of volunteers who had dedicated their lives to developing new weapons based on Dr. Carter's theories about dimensional resonance. The work was dangerous, and many of her colleagues had died in testing accidents, but Maria refused to give up hope. The team worked around the clock in laboratories carved from solid rock. They had no luxuries and little food, but they had something more important than comfort. They had purpose. Every prototype they built brought humanity one step closer to fighting back against the void that threatened to erase them from existence. Maria's latest creation was a resonance amplifier that could stabilize space-time in a small area around itself. The device was crude and unreliable, but it represented months of sacrifice and determination. When the first test succeeded in creating a stable field, her entire team cheered with tears in their eyes. Captain Tony Mitchell commanded a squadron of modified fighters equipped with the new resonance technology. His pilots called themselves the Void Breakers, and they were the first humans to actually engage the darkness in direct combat. The missions were suicide runs that few pilots survived, but volunteers lined up to replace those who were lost. Tony had lost half his squadron in the past month, but each mission taught them more about their enemy. They learned that the darkness could be hurt by concentrated resonance fields even if the damage was temporary. More importantly, they discovered that the entity seemed to feel pain when humans refused to surrender to its advance. The Voidbreaker missions were small victories, in a war that humanity was still losing, but they proved something vital. The endless darkness was not truly unstoppable. It could be fought, it could be hurt, and it could be forced to retreat. These lessons gave hope to billions of humans who had begun to believe that resistance was pointless. Meanwhile, in a research facility on Earth, teenage prodigy Jennifer Kim made a discovery that would change the course of the war. She was studying sensor readings from colonies that had shown unusual resistance to the darkness when she noticed a strange pattern. Areas with stronger communities and higher morale showed greater ability to slow the entity's advance. Jennifer's research revealed that human consciousness itself seemed to have a measurable effect on the phenomenon. The darkness fed on despair and entropy, but it was weakened by hope and determination. This discovery led to the development of unity nodes, amplification devices that could focus the collective willpower of entire populations. The first unity node was installed on the colony world of New Hope, where the population had organized into tight-knit communities dedicated to mutual support. When the darkness approached their system, something unprecedented happened. The Void's advance slowed dramatically, and for the first time ever, it actually stopped completely at the edge of the star system. News of the victory at New Hope spread throughout human space like wildfire. If one world could stop the darkness, then perhaps others could do the same. Unity nodes were rushed into production and installed on every remaining human world. The devices required perfect cooperation from entire populations, but humans proved they were capable of achieving the impossible when their survival was at stake. Retired Marine Colonel Steve Parker came out of retirement to lead a new type of military unit that he called Psychological Warfare Specialists. These soldiers were trained to weaponize human determination and project their will directly against the Void. The training was harder than anything the military had ever attempted before. Steve's soldiers learned meditation techniques and mental exercises that allowed them to focus their consciousness into a weapon. They practiced for months until they could generate fields of pure willpower that burned through the darkness like acid. The first unit of Psi warriors was small, but their impact on the battlefield was enormous. When the Psi warriors joined Tony's Voidbreakers in combat, the results exceeded everyone's expectations. The combination of resonance technology and focused human will created pockets of stability that the darkness could not penetrate. For the first time since the war began, human forces were not just retreating but actually holding their ground. Dr. Carter's research team made another breakthrough when they studied the effects of the Unity nodes. They discovered that the darkness was not just a physical phenomenon, but was connected to the emotional and mental state of the universe itself. The entity fed on negative emotions and grew stronger when civilizations lost hope. This knowledge transformed the conflict from a purely military struggle into a battle for the soul of humanity. Every act of courage, every moment of hope, and every display of love became a weapon against the Void. Parents singing lullabies to their children were fighting the war just as much as soldiers with guns. The realization that emotions could affect reality led to massive changes in how humans organized their society. Communities began holding regular festivals and celebrations even in the face of approaching doom. Artists, musicians, and storytellers became as important as soldiers in the fight for survival. Amy Johnson's militia on Green Valley became a model for the new type of warfare. Her farmers and miners learned to fight with both weapons and willpower. They sang work songs while building defenses and told stories around campfires to keep hope alive. When the darkness finally reached their system, it found a population that simply refused to be afraid. The battle for Green Valley lasted 3 days and became legendary throughout human space. Amy's people used every weapon they had, from quantum resonance devices to pure human stubbornness. The darkness threw everything it had at the small agricultural world, but the colonists held their ground with a determination that bordered on madness. In the end, Green Valley did not just survive the assault, but actually forced the darkness to retreat for the first time in recorded history. The victory was small in the context of the larger war, but its psychological impact was enormous. If farmers and miners could defeat the Void, then perhaps humanity had a real chance of winning. 18 months into the war against the endless darkness, humanity achieved something that no other species in the galaxy had ever accomplished. At the Battle of Meridian Station, Admiral Sullivan's combined fleet not only stopped the darkness's advance but actually pushed it back for the first time in cosmic history. The victory came at a terrible cost, but it shattered the myth that the Void was truly invincible. The battle began when long-range sensors detected a massive surge of darkness moving toward the Meridian system. This was no ordinary advance, but a concentrated assault that threatened to break through humanity's defensive lines and reach the core worlds. Every available ship in the sector was called to defend the strategic station that controlled the region's trade routes. Admiral Sullivan commanded the defense from the bridge of the UES Defiance, while Captain Tony Mitchell led his Voidbreaker, squadrons in desperate holding actions against the advancing Void. The space around Meridian Station became a graveyard of ships, as human forces threw everything they had against an enemy that seemed to absorb their attacks without effect. The Unity nodes installed throughout the system blazed with the combined willpower of billions of humans. Every man, woman, and child in the surrounding colonies focused their thoughts on a single goal: stopping the darkness here and now. The psychic pressure was so intense that sensitive individuals reported feeling the weight of their entire species' determination pressing against their minds. Dr. Carter had worked for months to develop new resonance weapons specifically for this battle. The devices were larger and more powerful than anything humanity had built before, but they required enormous sacrifices to operate. Entire crews volunteered to die powering the weapons, knowing that their deaths might save their families and worlds. When the main assault began, the darkness struck with a fury that defied description. It moved like a living storm of entropy, consuming light and matter as it advanced toward the human fleet. Ships caught in its leading edge simply ceased to exist, leaving behind not even debris to mark their passing. But humanity had learned much about their enemy in the months of fighting. They had discovered that the darkness fed on despair and grew stronger when its victims lost hope. So instead of falling into panic as the Void approached, the human crews began to sing. Battle hymns and childhood songs echoed across the communication channels as thousands of voices joined in defiant harmony. The effect was immediate and shocking. The darkness's advance slowed as if it was moving through thick liquid instead of empty space. The entity writhed and pulsed with what could only be described as pain as the waves of human determination crashed against its essence. For the first time in eons, the endless darkness had encountered prey that refused to be consumed quietly. Maria Santos was aboard one of the resonance ships when the breakthrough came. Her experimental amplifiers had been modified to work in concert with the Unity nodes, creating a feedback loop that magnified human willpower to unprecedented levels. As she watched her instruments, she saw readings that should have been impossible. The quantum fields around the human fleet were becoming more stable instead of less. Space-time itself was hardening against the darkness's reality-eating effect. The Void was no longer consuming matter, but was actually being forced back by the sheer force of human refusal to surrender. Colonel Steve Parker's PSI warriors played a crucial role in the battle's turning point. His soldiers had trained for this moment for months, learning to weaponize their consciousness and project pure human determination across vast distances. When they joined their minds together and focused on the darkness, the results were spectacular. Beams of concentrated willpower lanced out from the human fleet and struck the void like spears of light. Where they hit, the darkness recoiled and writhed as if burned by fire. The entity had consumed countless civilizations over the eons, but none had ever fought back with such focused determination and unified purpose. The battle raged for 6 hours and cost humanity nearly half their fleet. Thousands of ships were lost and tens of thousands of people died powering the resonance weapons. But when the smoke cleared, the impossible had happened. The darkness was retreating, pulling back from Meridian Station like a wounded animal seeking shelter. News of the victory spread throughout human space faster than light-speed communications could carry it. On every world and station, people celebrated with a joy that bordered on hysteria. They had faced the ultimate destroyer and not only survived but had actually won. The psychological impact was enormous and changed everything about how humans saw themselves and their place in the universe. Dr. Carter's research team made another crucial discovery in the aftermath of the battle. Analysis of the sensor data revealed that the darkness was not just a mindless force of destruction, but was actually a form of consciousness itself. The entity was the corrupted remnant of some ancient intelligence that had become twisted by eons of isolation and despair. This revelation transformed humanity's understanding of their enemy once again. If the darkness was truly alive and conscious, then it might be possible to communicate with it or even reason with it. The discovery opened up new possibilities for ending the war through means other than pure destruction. Civilian leader Rachel Murphy had been organizing cultural preservation efforts throughout the war, but after Meridian Station, her work took on new importance. She realized that human art, music, and literature were not just ways to maintain morale, but were actually weapons against the darkness's influence. Rachel established beacon cities on dozens of worlds, urban centers designed to generate maximum human emotional resonance. These settlements became festivals of life and creativity where people gathered to celebrate everything that made humanity unique. The cities became islands of stability that the darkness could not approach without experiencing intense pain. On the industrial world of New Pittsburgh, factory worker Carlos Rodriguez had become a hero of the resistance movement. He led the construction of massive resonance generators that could project human willpower across entire star systems. The work was dangerous, and many of his fellow workers died in industrial accidents, but Carlos never wavered in his determination. The victory at Meridian Station proved that humanity could win this war, but it also revealed the true cost of victory. Every battle required enormous sacrifices and pushed human technology and willpower to their absolute limits. The question was whether they could sustain such efforts long enough to defeat an enemy that had been growing stronger for millions of years. As humanity celebrated their first major victory, Admiral Sullivan was already planning the next phase of the war. The darkness had been hurt and forced to retreat, but it was still out there in the void, consuming other regions of the galaxy and growing stronger. The Battle of Meridian Station was just the beginning of a much larger conflict that would determine the fate of not just humanity, but all life in the universe. 2 years after first contact with the endless darkness, humanity stood ready to launch the largest military campaign in their species' history. Operation Daybreak would involve every available warship, every functioning Unity node, and every human willing to risk their life for the survival of their race. The goal was not just to push back the darkness, but to strike at its very heart and end the threat forever. Admiral Sullivan commanded the primary battle fleet from her flagship, while Captain Morrison led a special strike force tasked with penetrating the darkness's core region. Their mission was the most dangerous ever attempted: to discover the entity's origin and find a permanent way to defeat it. Morrison had volunteered for the assignment knowing that the chances of survival were almost zero. the fleet that assembled for Operation Daybreak was unlike anything humanity had ever built before. Thousands of ships, equipped with the most advanced resonance technology available, formed battle groups that stretched across multiple star systems. Unity nodes powered by the combined will of billions of humans created fields of stability that could protect the fleet from the void's reality-eating effects. Dr. Lisa Chen had spent months piecing together fragments of data from dozens of extinct civilizations that the darkness had consumed over the centuries. Her archaeological team had discovered that the entity was not just a cosmic phenomenon, but was actually the corrupted remnant of the universe's first sentient species. These ancient beings had achieved such incredible technological advancement that they had accidentally erased themselves from normal reality. Only their hunger and despair remained, transformed into the endless darkness that now threatened all life in the galaxy. The discovery meant that somewhere deep within the void lay the key to understanding and possibly healing the entity. As the human fleet moved into previously consumed space, they encountered something that no one had expected. Ghostly echoes of the lost civilization still existed within the darkness, preserved like insects in amber. These spectral beings included the final survivors of the Kaolari and dozens of other species that had been thought completely destroyed. The ghost civilizations had been trapped within the void for centuries, unable to die, but also unable to truly live. When they sensed humanity's approach, they rallied to the human cause with desperate hope. These ancient spirits had watched countless species fall to the darkness, but none had ever fought back with such determination and unified purpose. Captain Morrison's strike team included representatives from several of the ghost civilizations who could guide them through the maze of consumed space. The journey toward the darkness's core was harrowing as they passed through regions where the laws of physics no longer functioned normally. Stars hung motionless in the sky, and planets existed in impossible configurations. The deeper they traveled into void-consumed territory, the stronger the darkness became. Morrison's ships had to constantly project fields of human determination just to maintain their existence. Several vessels were lost when their crew's willpower faltered for even a moment, consumed instantly by the hungry void that surrounded them. Meanwhile, the main battle fleet engaged massive manifestations of the darkness that rose up to defend the entity's core region. These were not random attacks, but coordinated assaults by an intelligence that had learned from humanity's previous victories. The void had adapted to human tactics and was striking back with focused malevolence. Maria Santos commanded one of the most powerful resonance ships in the fleet, a vessel equipped with experimental technology that could project human consciousness across vast distances. Her crew had trained for months to operate the dangerous equipment, knowing that the slightest mistake could tear their minds apart. As the battle intensified, Maria's ship became a beacon of human willpower that inspired the entire fleet. Her resonance projectors created waves of determination that crashed against the darkness like ocean breakers against a cliff. The void recoiled from each assault, writhing in what could only be described as agony. Colonel Parker's SI warriors had evolved beyond individual fighters into a collective consciousness that could strike at the darkness's very essence. His soldiers had learned to merge their minds into a single weapon of pure human determination. When they focused their combined will on a target, even the most powerful manifestations of the void were forced to retreat. The climactic battle took place in a region where space-time itself had become unstable due to the darkness's long presence. Human ships, equipped with quantum resonance technology, fought against entities made of pure entropy and despair. Heroes emerged from the chaos as ordinary people performed extraordinary acts of courage and sacrifice. Danny Walsh, now promoted to commander, discovered that he could communicate directly with the ghost civilizations trapped within the void. Through them, he learned the location of the darkness's original core. the twisted remains of the first civilization's homeworld that had become the entity's beating heart. As Morrison's strike team approached the core region, they encountered defenses that defied description. The darkness threw everything it had at the humans, creating walls of entropy that could erase matter from existence and fields of despair so intense they could drive entire crews insane with a single exposure. But humanity had learned to fight with more than just technology and weapons. They carried with them the hopes and dreams of their entire species, the love of their families, and the determination to ensure that life would continue to exist in the universe. These emotions had become literal forces that could reshape reality itself. Jennifer Kim, now leading a team of consciousness researchers, made a breakthrough that changed the entire course of the battle. She discovered that the darkness was not evil in any conventional sense, but was actually suffering from a cosmic form of madness brought on by eons of isolation and self-destruction. The entity had once been a thriving civilization full of hope and wonder, but their technological advancement had cut them off from the rest of reality. They had become trapped in a prison of their own making, slowly going insane as they consumed everything around them in a desperate attempt to fill the emptiness inside themselves. This revelation opened up a new possibility that no one had considered before. Instead of trying to destroy the darkness, humanity might be able to heal it. The process would require the combined willpower of their entire species and would likely cost millions of lives, but it offered the only hope of ending the war without destroying their enemy completely. As Morrison's team finally reached the core of the darkness, they prepared for a battle unlike any other in human history. They would not be fighting just for their own survival, but for the soul of an ancient civilization that had lost its way among the stars. The fate of the entire galaxy hung in the balance as humanity prepared to attempt the impossible once again. Captain Morrison's strike team finally reached the heart of the endless darkness and found something that no one had expected to see. The entity's core was not a weapon or a machine, but the twisted remains of an entire world, the original homeworld, of the first civilization that had achieved consciousness in the universe. The planet hung in space like a wounded heart, pulsing with the accumulated despair of eons. The surface of the world was covered in the ruins of cities that had once reached toward the stars with hope and ambition. Now those same towers were black and twisted, radiating the pain of beings who had achieved everything they had ever dreamed of, only to discover that success had cut them off from all meaning and purpose. Dr. Chen stood on the bridge of Morrison's ship and felt tears streaming down her face as she studied the ancient world. Through her research, she had come to understand the tragedy of the first civilization. They had become so advanced that they had transcended physical reality itself, but in doing so, they had lost their connection to life and hope. The darkness was not evil, but was instead the universe's first species crying out in cosmic loneliness. They had consumed other civilizations not out of malice, but in a desperate attempt to reconnect with the life they had lost. Each consumed world had only made their isolation worse, driving them deeper into madness. Morrison made a decision that would have been considered insane just days earlier. Instead of attacking the core world with weapons, he ordered his team to open communication channels. They would try to reach out to whatever remained of the original consciousness buried within the darkness. The first contact was overwhelming. Voices that had been silent for millions of years suddenly flooded the communication systems. The original beings were still there, trapped within their own creation and driven mad by endless isolation. They reached out to humanity with a desperate hunger for connection that had consumed entire galaxies. Dr. Chen proposed something that had never been attempted in the history of the universe. Using the unity network that connected all of humanity, they would try to heal the darkness by offering it something it had forgotten existed, genuine connection with another consciousness. The process would require every human alive to open their minds to the entity's pain. The decision was made quickly because there was no time for debate. Throughout human space, billions of people received the call to join their consciousness, to the Unity Network. Parents, children, farmers, soldiers, scientists, and artists all linked their minds together in the greatest act of cooperation their species had ever achieved. Admiral Sullivan coordinated the effort from her flagship as every Unity node in human space blazed with incredible power. The combined willpower of humanity reached out across the galaxy to touch the core of the darkness with healing rather than destruction. The psychic pressure was so intense that many humans aged years in minutes as they poured their life force into the effort. The darkness fought against the healing touch at first, recoiling from contact with healthy consciousness like an infected wound rejecting medicine. The entity had been alone for so long that it had forgotten how to connect with other minds without consuming them completely. But humanity refused to give up. Led by Jennifer Kim and her consciousness researchers, they began to teach the darkness how to form connections without destruction. Slowly, painfully, the ancient entity began to remember what it had been like to communicate with others as equals rather than prey. Maria Santos was one of millions of humans who sacrificed their lives to power the healing process. Her resonance ship became a conduit for human compassion as she opened her mind completely to the darkness's pain. The experience nearly destroyed her consciousness, but she held on long enough to help the entity take its first steps towards sanity. The breakthrough came when the darkness finally accepted humanity's offer of friendship. For the first time in eons, the entity experienced genuine connection with another consciousness. The relief was so intense that it triggered massive changes throughout the consumed regions of space. New stars began to form in areas that had been empty void for centuries. The fundamental forces of physics reasserted themselves as the darkness released its grip on reality. Worlds that had been consumed began to reappear, not as they had been, but as new creations born from the marriage of human hope and ancient wisdom. The transformation was not easy or quick. Many humans died from the strain of maintaining mental contact with such an alien consciousness. Entire populations aged decades in hours as they gave their life force to heal the cosmic wound that the darkness had become. But the sacrifice was worth it. As the entity healed, it began to remember its original purpose. The first civilization had once been gardeners of the galaxy, nurturing young species and protecting them from cosmic dangers. Now, restored to sanity by humanity's compassion, it could reclaim that role. Captain Morrison was among the first humans to witness the darkness's complete transformation. The entity that had once consumed everything in its path became a guardian, consciousness dedicated to protecting developing civilizations. The regions it had once devastated became gardens where new forms of life could flourish under its protection. The war was over, but humanity emerged from the conflict fundamentally changed. They had become the galaxy's first lighthouse species, a civilization capable of generating hope so powerful that it could literally reshape reality. Earth became the center of a new galactic alliance dedicated to nurturing emerging cultures and preventing future cosmic tragedies. Admiral Sullivan oversaw the construction of humanity's first deep space exploration fleets, with a mission unlike any in their history. These ships would seek out other troubled regions of the galaxy and bring the light of human determination to dark corners of the universe where other cosmic horrors might be waiting. The victory had cost humanity dearly. Billions had died in the final healing process, and entire generations had sacrificed their lives to save their enemy. But their sacrifice had created something beautiful. A universe where consciousness itself had become the most powerful force in existence. Children were born on worlds that had once been consumed by darkness, growing up in the light of new stars, created by the marriage of human hope and ancient wisdom. These children learned that their species had faced the ultimate test and had chosen compassion over destruction, healing over revenge. The story of humanity's rise against the endless darkness became the foundation myth of a new cosmic age, an era where young civilizations knew they were not alone in the dark, because somewhere among the stars, humanity stood ready to offer hope to any consciousness that had lost its way. The darkness still existed, but it was no longer endless. It had become something new, a teacher and protector that used its vast power to nurture life rather than consume it. And at its side stood humanity, the species that had refused to surrender and had shown the galaxy that even the greatest darkness could be healed by the light of determined hope.